In this masterclass, you're going to be getting every single thing I know from NLP, hypnotherapy, shadow work, developmental psychology, Theravadan Buddhist philosophy and thought when it comes to developing the character trait of anti-fragility. This is one of those things which is so often talked about. I also think it's so often misunderstood. There's going to be a ton of practical exercises. There's going to be a ton of relational examples which you can relate to on your hero's journey, as well as a step-by-step guide on how to take you from A to Z, whatever that is for you. This is how I took myself from somebody who could be seen as very stereotypically fragile in terms of being very reactive, being very dependent on other people's validation, being very dependent on what the environment thought of me, to being able to be truly free, authentic, and powerful and empowered in myself, in such a way where didn't come across as domineering, narcissistic, or egocentric. It's something which is just a true, authentic expression of who you are. So let's get into the video. First and foremost, when it comes to developing anti-fragility, is looking at how you are holding your relationship with yourself. This can broadly be split into two different sections. The first one is just the attitude you have of yourself, right? Are you compassionate? Are you positive? Are you loving while still holding strong boundaries, goals, and aspirations for yourself? And the second one, which kind of is a little bit different, but it's still going to be grouped into this first point, is are you self-validated? Or are you craving validation from others? Because if there's even a little bit of validation, wanting validation from others, or the environment, or a culture, or maybe validation from certain ideas that you have internally, that's when it goes into more complex kind of territory. Then you will always have a little bit of fragility. It's almost like glass. There'll always be a little bit of glass in your spine. We want to eliminate that, okay? The second part of the table of contents is something which I call embracing the chaos. We're going to get into more detail there, but essentially what it is embracing the mindset that is embracing the mindset that you have to let the chips fall as they may. You can't control the results. Number 3 is the path of most resistance. So this is when we're building on the relationship and the mindset of embracing the chaos, and we're actually systematizing it in such a way where we can see which actions have direct return on investment, which actions have an ease of implementation, and then what are the different stressor events? Are they a red stressor? Are they a yellow stressor? Are they a green stressor? Are they a black stressor? Black stressor is like black level, right? Where something's really, really challenging and you can't really hold that space for yourself. And it's basically developing a system to walk yourself through how can I expose myself to this in a way which is integrated, in a way which is holistic, in a way where we can push ourselves without creating long-term harm for ourselves. Number 4 is identifying and healing triggers, insecurities, and faulty beliefs. This right here is where the deep personality, identity, and behavioral change will happen. We can't do shadow work, insecurity work, internal work, or unconscious work if we do not actually go out there and do the things that we have to do. Otherwise, we can delude ourselves in a fantasy, okay? Number 5 is becoming the witness. That's an advanced abstract concept. I'm just putting it into this guide for completion's sake because it's a masterclass and I want it to be complete. And then we'll go into recap, conclusion, and executions. So, relationship with yourself, 2 parts, compassion and self-validation. The big metaphor here that you want to use for this is, do you pat yourself on the back or do you hit yourself on the back? One actively makes you weaker. It actively makes you tense. Like there's like a reaction. Like if you know that if you're going to do something wrong or if you're going to do something challenging where there's a high chance of failure, and you know that with that high chance of failure, there's going to be a whip that's going to hit you, is that going to make you more tense? Have your cortisol spike, right? Have certain narratives and identities come up for you which will inhibit how free you feel? Or are you going to feel loose, relaxed, and free to do your best and try something new and experiment? Most likely, for most people that aren't masochists, I was going to say sadists, I guess that applies here as well. But for those people that aren't masochists, the answer is going to be, that's going to make me tense up. That's going to make me not perform to my best. That's going to make it seem like I have an insurmountable mountain to climb. Because not only this event is challenging enough, this thing that we want to do, this goal we want to achieve is challenging enough. There's a high chance of failure, whatever failure means in this in this example. But what makes that even worse is with that high chance of failure, I know that I'm going to have a bad reaction to myself. I'm going to call myself a pussy. I'm going to say you should have done better. I'm going to start questioning my self-worth. I'm going to start questioning whether I'm good enough. All of that kind of stuff only adds to the chance of failure, first and foremost, okay? Whereas the other, if you pat yourself on the back whilst holding yourself accountable, that's the nuance here, right? We can say, okay, we didn't achieve what we wanted, and there's a lot of things that I want to do better. But I'm going to give myself a pat on the back. I'm going to hold myself in compassion. I'm going to look at myself positively for even trying something that most people never try. And most people stay in their fantasy. It stays in their head, right? That's going to make you much more likely to re-engage with that experience over and over again, because the structure around that experience is uplifting. It's encouraging. It's positive reinforcement. It's instead of hitting yourself and self-flagellating yourself, you're saying, okay, we didn't get what we wanted, but we did really well. And that's super cool. And it just creates so much enthusiasm and positivity. That's really the building block of somebody who's really anti-fragile, somebody who really doesn't get affected by things. Doesn't mean, like I said, you don't hold yourself accountable, because that's what can sometimes happen. Oh, like everything's good and la, 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 and it doesn't matter, the result doesn't matter. The reason why you want that result is because the result does matter. It is important to you. So we're not trying to disown that, but we can have that and say, yep, I want to do better without our self-worth being called into question. So there's numerous studies to confirm this, right? That self-compassionate people are much more resilient and they take less time to get over their failures. So the most notable direct evidence comes from a 4-year longitudinal study by researchers at Duke University and University of North Carolina. They tracked 1,137 students in this study. And essentially over those 4 years, what they found is those that met stress with self-compassion. So the funny thing about this is you actually need stress to become resilient. Now, if you just have stress, you don't automatically become resilient. Sometimes diamonds aren't created by pressure, and sometimes pressure just crumbles coal into dust, okay? But if you have stress with this attitude of self-compassion, with this attitude of, I've got myself, of unconditional positivity, then what happens is you build resilience over the long term. You become something that's strong, something that when hard times hit, you don't break, but you bend, and then you come back into shape. Like an elastic band, it's elasticity, right? You can bend a bit, you can take tremendous pressure, and then you come back. That's what self-compassion does. It creates resiliency by making sure that you can cope better while you're going through the hard experience, whilst you're going through the stress, whilst you're going through all of that, okay? It enables you to handle that more. It's an amazing self-soothing thing, okay? And then once that stress has gone, you're able to pick yourself up and dust yourself off in a way which is much faster, much more efficient, and much more integrated as well. So what that means is you recover faster, essentially. Resilience is increased because it protects people from stress, it protects people from adversity, and it facilitates a swift recovery. And then what I wrote here is positive reinforcement wins every single time. So an interesting story from my life for this is when I was getting over social anxiety. So when I say social anxiety, people would say, oh, would I have trouble asking a grandma on the street for the time? This is like an example people use. For me, that was like 50-50, you know? Especially if I knew that I would have to do that, I knew I'd have to say something. That's the kind of level of social anxiety we were talking about. Now, it wasn't to the point where if I was in like a group of friends, I wouldn't be able to be social. I was able to be social then. Once I was comfortable with people, I was able to open up. But when it was like any kind of cold situation, any kind of a stranger, or any kind of even just a social challenge, I would just put so much pressure on myself and I'd be super socially anxious, okay? And part of the reason for that is because I had a very antagonistic relationship with myself. Like I was into all of the motivational talks and motivational speakers, all that kind of stuff. And they weren't necessarily antagonistic, but what they didn't encourage was having a positive look for yourself. They didn't say you should have a negative look on yourself, but there was a lot of pushing, there was a lot of force, there was a lot of rah-rah-rahing, there's a lot of you gotta want it as bad as you want to breathe. And that spoke to the constructs that I already had. It spoke to the beliefs that I already had. And that was to say, oh, negative reinforcement is good because it adds a ton of stress and it kind of forces you to jump out of homeostasis. And everything has a time and a place, okay? If that's the only way that you can motivate yourself, it's also the only way that you can relate to, then it does have a time and a place. When I say it's the only thing you can relate to, what I mean by that is for some of you that are listening, I don't think many of you that are listening, but for some of you maybe, or maybe in the past, if you're too positive, it can be outside of your emotional comfort zone because it's too high, it's too nice, okay? And if you, sometimes you have to meet yourself where you're at. And sometimes if you're in a deep shadow crash, you might have to speak to yourself in a bit more of a harsh way. I'm not saying that that doesn't have a place. What I'm saying is that's the exception and not the rule. Because from this story, I would always berate myself. I'd be mean to myself as well. Like I said, calling myself a pussy was a classic if I didn't go and say hi to somebody. And what this did is it made me less likely to actually go and say hi because all of this mental chatter was negative. It wasn't encouraging. It wasn't positive, which means that you develop the opposite of not motivation, but the word I'm looking for here is motivation, momentum. It's the opposite of momentum, is what you're creating for yourself. You're creating negative momentum because your relationship with yourself, what stems from that is thoughts and feelings and beliefs, okay? And if all of that is centered around negativity and negative reinforcement, then you have all of this extra internal resistance because you don't feel good, you're not thinking good, you're not thinking in a positive way. And then what happens is you start to fantasize that this stranger that you're trying to speak to, whatever situation it is going to give you a massive rejection or embarrass you or tell you off or all of that kind of stuff because that's the breeding ground that you're creating for yourself. Okay? And so between social interactions, when I was trying to push myself like this, short term, it kind of worked. But because I was creating all of this negative storylines, I was creating this action to also make suffering for myself. So what I developed is my relationship with all of these social practices I was doing became very negative and it became very full of suffering, which then meant it was harder for me to go out after this, day after day after day. So much so that I would spend like hours just like walking around, not being able to speak to anyone and just speaking to myself in my head, like berating myself, all that kind of stuff. But over the years, when I integrated all of the compassion and metta and all of this stuff that I'm teaching you now on this channel, I wouldn't need any effort to go and speak to anyone, ever. Like I can't think of the last time I was socially stifled, to be honest with you. And it's because of this integration. It went from me going sometimes upwards of 3 hours not being able to speak to anybody in any situation, to now it's not even an issue for me anymore. It's as easy as just saying hello. Because all of those negative storylines are no longer being formulated. If you don't have negative expectations, if you're not predicting the negative outcome, if you're not predicting negativity, if you're not assuming that it's always going to be bad, then it just makes everything very fluid and very smooth with whatever you want to do. And it starts with the relationship with yourself, okay? Now, if we want to talk about self-validation, and we'll get to the exercises, there's a ton of practical exercises, there's a ton of everything you're going to need to actually start implementing this. It's not just theory. For the self-validation part, I have a masterclass on this, so I'll leave the minutiae of the details there. But like I said, it starts with this compassionate relation with yourself, and it moves to being comfortable saying what you want to say without becoming overbearing, narcissistic, or domineering. These are all bad things in the social hierarchy, by the way, okay? Because people won't like that you're doing this and they will band together to resist this and they'll kind of piece by piece isolate you because you're just being a bully, essentially. That's why we start with compassion for ourselves. But then once you have a real strong basis of compassion for yourself, compassion just kind of naturally spreads to other people. That's what states do. They naturally spread to you want to hold other people with compassion. Now, a little caveat here, because I'm thinking of a specific person right now that I'm working one-on-one with. It doesn't mean a feeling. Some people, they just have strong feelings, and some people have less strong feelings, okay? It's having the intention of compassion, the intention to be compassionate with somebody, wanting to put a compassionate relationship at the forefront of whoever you're meeting, okay? Doesn't have anything to do with the feeling necessarily. The feeling does make it easier, but if you're a bit more logical, if these practices are quite new for you, then don't worry about it at all, okay? It's just having the intention of compassion. Like I said, the reason why this relates to anti-fragility is because if you are fully compassionate to yourself and for other people, you just get less reactive, you have less of a short fuse, and you just don't get fazed by things, which is the cornerstone of anti-fragility. But it starts with a relationship. If you don't start with a relationship and you just do techniques and tactics, then you can act like you're anti-fragile, but internally you just feel like the same person, okay? Always, always, always prioritize states into traits, intentions and principles into traits, not the other way around. You'll thank me later. So the exercises for this, like I said, will be compassionate meditation, right? When I say compassionate meditation, the exercise for this will be about 15 to 30 minutes. And you focus on yourself first and then you radiate to a spiritual friend. Don't worry, I'm going to get into this. And use the never mind game to come back to the object. So essentially what we're going to develop right now is a metta meditation. I get this from the lineage of Dharma Sukha Twim. I'll have a link if somebody asks for it. But essentially what you do is you get into a comfortable position and you close your eyes. And for the first 5 minutes, you just bring up an image that brings you compassion and love, okay? This can be a person. Stay away from romantic interests, okay? Because sometimes our mind can get carried away and it becomes more sexual in nature. And then that's not compassion, that's something else, okay? That's not something bad, it's just something else. So you want to stay something platonic. Some people will be family members, for some people it will be friends. Some people, they might have a hard time with those people. Don't worry about that. You can go to babies. Some people get triggered by babies. That's okay. Or you can go to any kind of cute animal. Anything that brings up a real kind of cute warmth. And you just hold that image in your mind until you have a good kind of basis of compassion, of feeling compassion and metta within yourself, okay? That's for the first 5 minutes. For the next 15 to 25 minutes, you then take that feeling that you have for yourself, that intention that you developed from these practices, and you radiate it towards yourself. And the thing that helps you focus on that feeling are the 4 mantras that I'm about to give you. They are, may you be healthy, may you be happy, may you be safe, may you be loved. You're saying that to yourself, okay? This is affirmations, this is mantras, this is all that kind of good stuff. But it's also developing the state so we can be in that state for longer, and then we can bring that in to our daily interactions and just daily ways of being, okay? And then what will happen with meditation is it's very unstimulating and it's very boring. That's normal, okay? And it's also normal to get distracted. That's the whole point of the meditation. We just want to develop the state, so we're not going to worry about that too much to begin with, okay? Instead, what we want to do is we want to, every time we notice we get distracted, what it is we're almost straying from the meditation like this, like our mind is going like that. So instead, what we're going to do is the first step is already done for us on autopilot, okay? The first step is we realize, this is the never mind game, by the way. We realize, oh, we've gone now. Second is we release our attention on the object. All that is we say, oh, we were just thinking about all this stuff over here. Let's come back to here, okay? Then we relax any tension that comes up in the mind, that has come up in the mind. What you'll notice is when you get distracted by things, you get lots of tension in your mind. You want to relax that. It's as simple as just relaxing the tension. Like, you think of the tension, oh, how do I relax it? You can tense up your head and then you relax it. 4 is you re-smile. This is a smiling meditation, okay? Doesn't have to be a big goofy smile, right? We don't want to overdo it. Just a little like Buddha smile, like this, okay? And then number 5 is we say never mind and we continue the practice. That shouldn't take you longer than 3 seconds, okay? If you do not do this, what happens is your mind will get very hard from meditation. We want it to be a soft, easy, nurturing meditation. This is the backbone for how you can start to develop this relationship with yourself. Just 15 to 30 minutes a day. At the start, It will feel like you're doing things wrong. It'll feel like you're not doing anything. That's normal, okay? We just need to give ourselves the time and the space to practice this relationship with ourselves, okay? Second is more of a breath practice. So we have this meditation in our back pocket, and this will be the easiest one to implement straight away, okay? So if those of you that want to get started straight away, this will give you the biggest ROI. And it's having the intention of being positive and being loving to yourself all the time. It's an intention, it's not a feeling. So every time you go into a place, an environment, an interaction, an activity where you've noticed that this is usually kind of a trigger where you don't have the most compassion for yourself and you become really irritated, angry, you feel very fragile, and maybe you use anger to overcome that, okay? And setting boundaries and being really aggressive. You just come into that interaction. You take a moment or a minute to set the intention, I'm going to be compassionate to myself no matter what. Even if I get really angry, I'm going to have compassion to myself. I'm still going to hold myself in positive regard, okay? Very important distinction. Intention, not feeling. Now we come to another way to kind of hammer this home is if a feeling is somatic and sensorial, an intention can be both of those things, so it can include those things. However, rather than a feeling state, it's more of a pair of glasses that you're putting on that affects how you view the world, that affects your perspective on the world, how you view yourself as a person. So it's not a feeling, it's not coming from here. It's like us putting on a different pair of glasses and seeing the world differently, seeing ourselves differently. That's the metaphor right here for having that intention. So an example for a client of mine, we'll call him Joe. They were very focused on a specific feeling. And it was my mistake, to be honest, because I thought he was further along in his practice than he was, developmentally wise. But then as soon as we realized that we don't have to come from the feeling of compassion, and we implemented the distinction that this is an intention that we hold for ourselves, it became much easier for him to hold a compassionate view of himself. And then when you're able to hold a compassionate view of himself, Joe was able to do this, the ups and downs of his internal world just became much more peaceful. There were still ups and downs, but he wasn't affected by it. He had a lot of things coming up around perfectionism. That was the thing that, and comparison, which made that up and down happen. As soon as we were able to lock in this, even just this mental reframe, it became much easier for him to be less perfectionistic. And he was still comparing himself to other people because there was a use in that. There's a use to comparing yourself in other people, but it doesn't have to diminish him in any kind of way, okay? That's why it's so important to have this distinction, intention versus feeling. Now we get on to the second part of this masterclass, which is embracing the chaos. This is where the fun stuff begins, okay? And colloquially, this is accepting the chips as they fall, accepting the chips fall as they may, okay? And the reason why I included this is because a lot of the time we're doing this, we're trying to become anti-fragile, we're trying to become resilient, we're trying to have internal mastery and external mastery as well, and because it's all coming from a subtle feeling of still trying to control the result. You cannot control the result. You can control your actions, and that can give you really good outcomes. But in terms of like an individualized, localized result, like if I say this thing, somebody's going to react in a certain way, or if I set this boundary, the other person's going to accept it. It's not going to happen all the time. All of this stuff will make it so you remain unaffected, and because you remain unaffected, people will naturally fall into your worldview a lot more, but you cannot control the outcome. So let me just put that out there just to make sure that nobody's fantasizing about that. Essentially, the argument here is you have to have as much compassion and self-validation, or you can have as much compassion and self-validation as you want, but without an external acknowledgement and promise to yourself that you are willing to be a little disliked, being perceived as a little bit edgy or disagreeable by some people, being perceived as maybe weird, or whatever kind of detrimental social label that we can think of. You have to be willing to accept that and not let it affect you. Because here's the other thing, if we're going through this work, if we're doing this really deep work, if we want to become anti-fragile, if we want to become all of that kind of stuff, It means that there's a certain version of ourselves that other people have gotten accustomed to. And if they've gotten accustomed to it, then there can be a little bit of pushback. Sometimes there can be a lot of pushback when you don't fall into that view that they have of you anymore. A lot of the time, that pushback will just be unconscious on their part. It'll be innocuous. They won't mean anything malicious to it. The people where they do mean something malicious about it is because they become reliant on this fragility that you have inside of you. The fact that you can't set boundaries, all that kind of stuff. So that's like a good kind of letting go process for you. But you have to be okay with people putting these labels on you extra, because they're comparing and contrasting who you used to be, okay? Whereas if you just come with that energy now with just a normal person, they'll just accept it because they don't have any frame of reference for you. The fact that they have a frame of reference for you means that they could have a bit of an ego backlash to what they're accustomed to. And that's okay. You know, we're not here to have everyone like us. We're also not here to make people artificially dislike us, okay? Don't worry about it for now, but that's just something to hold in your awareness. So the fact that it affects you isn't bad in and of itself. Of course, we're going to have a bit of grief if this person that we spend a big part of our life with is reacting to us in a different way, maybe even a bad way. But it's bad if it affects us in a way where it really stops us from actually owning who we are, our truth, our authenticity, our identity, whatever you want to call it. We don't want to ever, it's not about not feeling resistance. It's not about not feeling weak. It's not about not feeling fragile. It's about being okay with that. That's true anti-fragility right there. Feeling that fragility, but then being okay with it anyway. So an example of this is I had a client, we'll call him George. He, very relaxed, very grounded, has a great presence, still has some issues around conflict. And luckily we had a great learning example where in his co-working space, they kind of went out to drinks, I believe, or something like that, or a party, or they were just kind of hanging out. It's a group of them. And there was one guy who's normally really nice. Suddenly he gets on the beer and he starts having a bit of a drink and he starts like being just mean to my client, George. Okay. I forgot what I called him. I think it's George. And just saying, oh, you're full of shit, all that kind of stuff. And other people noticed it too. And we had a call about it, an emergency call about it, to give him the support that he needs. And essentially what he had to do is he had to pull him for a chat and ask him. And he felt a lot of resistance, a lot of tension. And that can be interpreted as fragility. I don't interpret that as fragility at all. But a lot of people, but maybe you watching this might interpret that as fragility. And he said it anyway, despite that. He was equanimous with it because he needed to have that conversation and conflict. Like, where is this actually coming from? And the guy was super apologetic, whilst we thought it was going to be maybe even a bigger conflict, he was very like, yeah, you're right, I'm so sorry. And because of that, their relationship was able to become closer and there wasn't any resentment that was being built over a long period of time. Because he wasn't trying to avoid the feeling of being fragile. He even told me when he was having this conversation with this guy, he felt all this anxiety in his chest. And yet the other guy was still very deferential to him. Obviously, because he was the one that was being out of order, okay? So the reason why I'm telling you that story is because we're not trying to not feel a certain way. We're trying to become equanimous with that feeling. So how you can think about it is if you're playing a game of poker and you can bluff, right? And be a good player and win a decent amount. But part of being a good bluffer and being a good calculated risk taker is knowing that this is a risk. Knowing that that not only could you lose, you are going to lose at some point, okay? And accepting that reality. Because if you have resistance to that, people can read that in your self-communications. They can read, oh, this guy isn't actually sure about himself. Maybe this thing that he's trying to act so confident with isn't actually the thing. Because there's all of this internal tension. You're trying so hard to resist that make sure it doesn't happen. You're trying so hard to make sure that you don't play any risks, right? And then if you embrace that, if you take that mindset to the fullest extent, then you miss opportunities. You don't bluff when you could have because you're so focused on not losing that you can't even get out of your way to win, basically. Like I said, it will come across in your self-communications. Obviously, if we extrapolate that out from poker, that just is in life in general. And then you'll come across as stiff, like you really need to win this time. And because you really need to win and you don't accept losing, then you don't win and you lose more. Because like I said, you miss opportunities. And the times where you do go in for opportunities, there's just so much more friction that you have to fight between, that it takes up so much mental RAM that you don't have space to process things as they come up. So you become slower to respond. And then when it doesn't go well, you become slower to pick yourself up. It's ironically by accepting the worst outcomes that we can become free of fear and more naturally ourselves. So example from my own journey is whenever I get into conflicts or set boundaries or be a bit more disagreeable. So on the disagreeable, agreeable polarity kind of framing, I'm pretty high on the agreeable framing, right? I try and resist the worst possible outcome so much, like I have so much internal tension and resistance towards it, because I thought it made me stronger, and I thought for some reason, this is such a weird belief, I thought by resisting something, it would make it less likely to happen. So there was like some magical thinking there. What that means is like I thought that if I really didn't accept the bad outcome, that would somehow make the good outcome more likely. Now, as you can tell why I'm telling this story, in actuality, that's not what happened. And it took me a while to resolve this because it was a real leap of faith. Because I thought that by resolving that belief and by accepting bad outcomes that they could happen, that I was going to make that more likely to happen. So it took a lot of courage. I had to take like a real internal leap of faith to be like, this old belief is just not working. This old frame of view is just not working at all. Okay? So even if this other thing isn't working, I'm willing to accept that because it's clear that this paradigm is holding me back. Whenever you guys are kind of at that own internal leap of faith, that's kind of the mindset that really helps me and my clients. So I think it will help you too. And then also to top it off, it just built up loads of internal resistance to me actually doing the thing, like actually setting the boundary or having to be a little bit disagreeable or have a bit of an argument. And it just increased suffering in general. So it made a molehill into a mountain. So some exercises that we're going to get into here is you want to have these stories in the back of your mind in every possible situation where you feel like you have a real fragility. Okay? So it requires a bit of planning. This can happen in the moment too. So in the moment, if you just want to have something to implement straight away, whenever you feel that resilience, like, oh, that fragility, I want you to stop resisting that vulnerability, whatever you want to call it, and just accept it. Yeah, I am feeling like that. I promise you, if you accept that without the thing that sneaks in there, right? And I know this because I used to have this when I was competing jiu-jitsu. I'd just be like, yeah, I am feeling nervous. But the reason I was saying that is so I could not feel nervous, okay? What you have to do is, it's a real, again, like a leap of faith. You have to say, okay, I am feeling nervous and that's okay. And without that thing coming in, but I'm doing this to try and not feel nervous. You just say, no, I am actually just feeling nervous. When you do that, all of that resistance that you're using to push against this thing just becomes freed up energy. So you still feel all of that nervousness, you still feel all of that vulnerability, but now you have more energy and empowerment and power to actually go and do the thing. Because you're no longer resisting yourself, you've accepted that. If you've accepted something truly, you just don't have any more resistance to it because you've accepted it. And it makes you much more empowered. When I was able to do this, I felt the best I ever felt at the World Championships of Jiu-Jitsu, something which I traveled across continents to America, in order to compete. I invested a ton of money, the most money I've ever invested into a competition, the most training I've ever invested into it. And I felt and it was the biggest stage I've ever been on. The other stage that I've been on was probably, that comes close, was Europeans, no-gis, but it still was like not as big. And then the other one was the Abu Dhabi Grand Slam in London. But this was the biggest one, and I felt the best I ever felt because I did this. I'd done so much unconscious work. I implemented all of this stuff that I'm teaching you right now. And if that's a little bit hard for you in terms of not letting that other thing sneak in, first of all, that's something to do shadow work on, which we're going to get into later in this masterclass. But second of all, it's something where how you get over that, as you say, is you notice the fact that you're trying to not feel nervous, and you say, and I accept that too. Cool. That's just what I'm trying to do. I can't do anything. This changes your relationship to stress and vulnerability and fragility almost instantaneously. And what's funny is if we are grading ourselves on the feeling of something, right, then that feeling will still be there. But because the way that we're viewing it is different, the different glasses have been put on, it's like a painkiller. I'm not sure if you've ever been on very strong painkillers or painkillers at all. Essentially, how they work is you still feel the pain, you just don't care about it. It's the same thing here. And if you have a bit more time and you want to really do your due diligence, wow, I can't pronounce that. Due diligence, that's much better. Then if there's something that's really approaching, then you take a pen and paper. You want to do pen and paper because I found there's also some science that's behind this, although I don't have the study to hand, that there's more of a mind muscle connection when you write. You want to take a piece of paper and a pen and write out the worst possible scenario that you're dreading in full detail. I mean, it can be a paragraph or it can be like a loads of pages. It doesn't really matter. Just in full detail. And sometimes you'll have multiple of these things. So you can get it on paper and you can really look at it and then you accept that. A lot of the time what you'll find from this is it's actually the fear of the unknown which is really scaring us. We have a vague idea of what can happen, like we don't make money or someone says no to us or we get laughed at. But until we actually write it out and we see what's actually scaring us, it's the same thing as in a dream, right? Like you're running away from something and it feels really big and really scary. But as soon as you stop and you turn around and you face it, suddenly that fear changes. And more often than not, that dream completely switches. It's because it's the fear of the unknown. We need to look at it face to face. Stare straight into the abyss. Boom. That's how you get over it. You stop making it something that's unknown and you see it in full writing. And you say, oh, it's actually not that bad. Okay? That's when you tap into courage, by the way. So it's just now when we get into the path of most resistance. We have the relationship with ourselves. We have this concept I just talked about. The path of most resistance, the argument, the thesis here is this is exposure therapy, but in a more, at least from my point of view and what I've worked with clients and mentors as well, it's a bit more practical, it's a bit more holistic, at least than just like obviously exposure therapy. Everyone has like different ways of working with it. I'm not saying it's more practical or more holistic than that. I'm just saying that just like the idea of exposure therapy as in general, which is in the zeitgeist of most people maybe watching this, because it's just kind of very general and doesn't really give you a step-by-step plan. So we've already got our internal bases covered. Now it's time to expose ourselves piece by piece to the external world and build the skill of emotional resilience. Actually put ourselves in positions where we feel the fragility and it's okay. It's not about removing vulnerability, fragility within ourselves. That happens automatically. It's being okay with that. That's being truly unflappable and anti-fragile. You can be the best driver in the world, okay? But until you actually have a vehicle and you're sitting in that car, you'll never know if you are the best driver in the world. You can never improve. The vehicle is the vehicle of growth. So the path of most resistance is the vehicle in this metaphor. And it's whatever's the most difficult, whatever the most difficult is whatever's the most complex. Like it's actually hard to understand. Second is whatever is the most intimidating. And third is whatever is the most boring. I got this framework from my long-term mentor, Pierre de Souza at Unshakable on YouTube, is where he is right now. This is also from some masculine polarity frameworks and all that kind of good stuff. And a story that illustrates this, we're going to get into how that actually breaks down and how you can do that for yourself, obviously, is we'll say my client George. Is it the same George? I can't remember, but we'll just call him George again. Everyone's been called Joe or George. That's kind of funny. Has done all the internal work, right? He's been meditating, traveling to India, gone on all these ashrams, and then had even done reparenting. For those of you who don't know what reparenting is, it's done by, wow, I've completely forgotten what his name is. Let me just type that up right now. Reparenting. Yeah, reparenting. Dan P. Brown, I believe is who it is. Yeah, Dan P. Brown. So he recently passed away, so rest in peace. But he's a psychologist. He's also super deep into Buddhism and uses a lot of his money to pay for Dharma translations from Pali to English. Really well respected, one of the most elite I guess it's hypnotherapy and psychotherapy fused into one of the most elite therapeutic things on the market. He'd done reparenting, he'd done all of that kind of stuff. And it led to him being very mature, obviously. But what it also did is it led to a certain shadow becoming very mature for him, which always wanted a very mental, abstract, or theoretical answer. He always wanted to understand. He also wanted to George always wanted to feel perfectly aligned before doing something. Now, we've done a lot of one-on-one work on this and he's gotten a lot better, but we did a retreat because I need to be with somebody to really show them the level of the path of most resistance which they should go on. And for him, he wanted to do it a lot around socializing, that there was a real block around wanting to really understand and perfectly feel aligned and not feel any resistance when going to speak to people he was interested in, or just be free in a social environment, right? So we worked on actually going out and doing the difficult thing, being more stupid, being more simple, right? Not always wanting a theoretical answer. This is for those of you who are listening to this, who have watched all the frameworks, they've watched all the breakdowns, they've even done therapy, all that kind of stuff, and they've had a lot of progress from it, but there's something in their external which hasn't matched, whether that's in relationships, whether that's in work, starting a business, getting promotion, traveling. It can be so many different things. This is the thing that you're missing, okay? And from that, because this was about relationships and dating and socializing in general, in that 4-day retreat, he got more results in that 4-day retreat than he had in the past half a decade of doing all of that work, meditation. All of that internal stuff is amazing, and it's what enabled him to get such fast results. But sometimes you've got to break it down and just do the thing that's difficult. Whatever's the most boring, whatever's the most difficult, whatever's the most complex, right? Less internalizing and more doing. But again, like I said, this has happened so quickly because you've done all of the necessary internal groundwork, okay? So the exercise for this is you want to start by identifying your North Star. Just have one at the beginning. I want to be more social. I want to get a relationship that's loving and supportive. I want to start my side hustle, my business. I want to finally be able to be comfortable setting boundaries with people. All of these are like a big North Star. Then you have that North Star, and then you write out whatever's the most boring, whatever's the most difficult, whatever is the most intimidating. And for each section, you write 2 or 3 activities or actions that, if you were to do them consistently, get you closer to that North Star exposure. And you split them in. You're not always going to have 2 to 3. Sometimes you're going to have more. You want to condense it into 2 to 3. And if you don't have 2 to 3, that's great. You just have one thing. And then once you've written that out and you can see the activities that get you to that North Star, you tier them into a red, yellow, green system. Green is stuff that you can implement straight away. It's stuff which you can do like that. Like a lot of the exercises that I just gave you before, you can just implement them like that. Yellow is your growth potential. Yellow is where there's some resistance, sometimes a lot of resistance, but you're still able to actually go out and do the damn thing. Red is when it's like the last 10% where you really struggle doing things. So what you want to do is you want to prioritize doing the yellow. Obviously the green you just implement straight away. And then over time of being in the yellow, the red activities will become yellow because your emotional comfort zone will have expanded, okay? And then as an added thing, what you can do is you can tier that into a return on investment system or return on ROI system, versus ease of implementation, ease of change. What that means is you then tier each of those activities that you just tiered into red, yellow, green, and you say, if I was to do this, how much of a big in return on investment would this do? Like, let's say if you have social anxiety, doing internal mantras could be an activity, or actually going out and asking people for the time is another one. The second one is going to give you a much bigger return on investment, okay, than the first one, infinitely amount. So much more that it doesn't matter how easy that is to do. That's the thing that you should prioritize. That's what the return on investment system is, okay? Then we get to number 4, which is so important. And it's obviously what a lot of this channel is about, is identifying and healing your triggers as they come up on your path. We can't have a map of something if we don't know the place even exists. okay? Christopher Columbus or Leif Erikson of the Vikings, they don't have a map of America before they went there. They had it when they came back. We have to explore the area first in person, not the other way around, okay? Otherwise we're just fantasizing and we're not really engaging in reality. So like I said, it's like an adventurer that goes to a foreign land. Before he goes to that foreign land, before she goes and sets sail onto this massive adventure, she needs to experience it. She needs to go and see the landscape. She needs to go and interact with the locals. He needs to go and see the vistas, all of that kind of stuff. And then he or she can draw the map. Otherwise, it's completely illogical. So when I was in Thailand, I was able to bliss out with meditation and this new form of shadow work, which I was studying with Kim Barter. I was doing his year-long intensive, and then all of the mentorship and hypnotherapy and all that kind of stuff that I've been doing with Sister Kama and Pierre. However, I could do all of that kind of stuff and I could say, oh, I'm basically enlightened, I don't have any more triggers, all that kind of stuff. But there was one area that was really avoiding, and that was really building a business on my own, like having that hero's journey, being a solo entrepreneur, being able to take back control of finances and address all of the money beliefs that I have sitting under the surface because of my upbringing, all that kind of stuff. If I didn't expose myself to that journey, I could have basically just chilled out in Thailand. I could still be there right now, blissing out and thinking I had it all figured out. And in some ways, I'm not knocking that. If you want to do that, great. But I was actively avoiding the path of most resistance because that was an area of life which I'd never tackled before, truly. And I was kind of dipping and dabbling into it, but it was only until I was like, no, I really want to figure this stuff out, that I was able to unlock the next turning of my hero's journey. Because new insecurities came up, new triggers came up, I was exposing myself, I was giving myself North Stars and principles and goals, and I was falling short. And suddenly all of that enlightenment and all that kind of stuff that I thought was there, wasn't there. Now, let me just say that 80% of the time I was still great, okay? But 20% of the time is still a lot. But I wouldn't have unlocked that if I hadn't have gone down the path of most resistance, if I hadn't have prioritized, if I hadn't gone after what I wanted. And it wouldn't have given me an opportunity to do exactly what I was just talking about here, which is healing insecurities and shadows as they come up, okay? Because I can theorize, oh, I had money blocks and all that kind of stuff, but until I actually went out and started growing my business, or I had blocks around being seen, right, promoting myself on Facebook at the time, actually, which is funny, but now I'm on YouTube, okay? I wouldn't have known any of that if I didn't have that. That's why this is number 4 of the system. But I would say this is the thing which gives you the deepest, or some of the deepest behavioral personality and identity shifts, obviously with shadow work, because our beliefs are like our frames on reality. If we have beliefs about something, if we have cherished truths about something, then that completely changes how we view something. Like somebody who likes Turkish food, if they see that they have Turkish food waiting for them when they get home, or they know that, suddenly their day is, they get really excited, they're super enthusiastic, they crush extra hard because they're using that as an opportunity to reward themselves. Versus somebody who doesn't like Turkish food, for example, and they know they have it waiting for them, suddenly they get really demotivated. They're not as engaged because they don't have anything to look forward to anymore. That's like a very trivial, it's also kind of funny example of like how we use beliefs how beliefs shape our reality, okay? And if we can go and we can not hack that, but really deeply heal them or make them become more mature or just get rid of them and let something new that's deeply authentic to you take its place and blossom, then we can actually become a totally different person while still remaining true to ourselves. So how you do this is you split them up into introjection, projection, split ego state. Introjections, it's always when you feel small or weak, like you feel like you're having to protect yourself, because an introjection shadow is something that was given to us externally by something or someone else that we didn't have to begin with. The healing process for that is letting go and giving it back where it came from. Projections are whenever we feel angry most of the time. Whenever we're like, no, it is that person. It's not me that's getting triggered, it's that person, right? That's a projection because we have something that we don't want to admit about ourselves, aka a shadow or an insecurity, okay? And then, because we don't want to admit that about ourselves, we push that onto the outside world. So the healing process for projection is re-owning that, realizing, wait, it's not the outside world. It's not the outside world that's making this internal thing happen. Who would have thought? It's coming from me. And then split ego states is whenever we feel confused, whenever we feel like there's self-sabotage, whenever we feel like there's like a more mature part of us that's kind of fighting us at every step or just subtly doing things, it's whenever we feel split off from ourselves. That's because there's been a part of us that's been walled off at some time. It can be young, but it can also be mature. That's why you should not just treat that as like an inner child. There are inner children inside of you, but there's also inner teenagers and adults. And if you start treating them like a child, then they're just going to not like that because you're not respecting them. And the healing process for that is reintegration, reintegrating that part back into the whole. So you can work together rather than working against each other. You do not use this as an excuse that every time you get triggered to just, oh, I have to do my shadow work now. No, you keep on doing the difficult thing. And it's only when you take a natural break that you can go and do the shadow work on yourself. Feedback is in real time. You know when a trigger is healed by the fact that you're no longer triggered anymore, okay? So don't try and preempt it. You just do everything you can, heal the trigger as best you can, and then go out and just expose yourself again with all of the steps that I've just given you, okay? The reason why I say that is because maybe you could be like George or some of my other clients where they feel like every single disturbance is a reason that something isn't working. No, that's the opposite of anti-fragile. We want to say, okay, yeah, there's a disturbance. I'm going to acknowledge that and I'm going to keep on moving forward. That's the frame that you want to have. The only exception to that is if you're like 10 out of 10 triggered. Then you have to remove yourself and you have to work on it, okay? Exercises, very simple. I have a 2.5-hour live stream going into my whole system that I use with my one-on-one clients, my 3-month or my 6-month program, rather, about how I get deep personality change. It's completely free. All it's going to cost is your email. I'll send it straight over to you. That gives you the full system of how to heal, identify and heal your beliefs, okay? It's in the link below, or it's in the comment section below, and it's in the description box below. Go ahead and download it, and that will change your life when it comes to this. And then the last one, like I said, very advanced, very abstract. I recommend if you do want to watch this, watch it with a very open mind, and then forget about it. Okay, if you're one of my one-on-one students, ask me about this. Maybe you are ready for this. Most likely, we would have already talked about it if you are, but you can get curious about it. And this is becoming the witness, okay? By having knowledge and access to the insight that this trigger, this fragility, this vulnerability, thisness is not you, means that not only are you anti-fragile, but you don't exist in the paradigm where being fragile is a possibility. I told you. It's quite abstract, right? And it's something, the reason why, like I said, I'm including this for completion's sake. Just take whatever comes out of this, okay, for you. The analogy here is playing the game versus being above the paradigm where the game is played. An example is, let's say you're a toddler. It's easy to get triggered by other toddlers because you're in the worldview, you're in the paradigm of toddlership. I'm not sure what word to use there. You're in that paradigm. You're in that world of the toddler. So it's easy to, oh, this person stole my thing over here, or I said this, she said this, he has a pirate, I want a pirate, all that kind of stuff, you know? It's easy to get triggered by that. But as a fully grown, mature adult, if toddlers are doing that to you, you can't get triggered by them. Exceptions, some people have specific triggers and shadows around toddlers, okay? This is not speaking about you, if that's one of you, okay? Because it doesn't make any sense. You're so many levels above that paradigm where the toddler is trying to steal a Play-Doh or whatever, right? That you can't get triggered by. You just find it funny. But because you've been at that stage, you can step in to that world and you can play with the toddler and you can have fun. You can be in that world. But you are fundamentally at a paradigm where you cannot get affected by that anymore. That's what this means, becoming the witness. I wonder how many people I'm losing with this section. So, funny story, or just a story, rather. We'll see if it's funny. Seeing how people came to conclusions and how impersonal it was, how culture shaped you, how your parents shaped you, how experiences shaped you, and how all of that was constructed with a meaning that was kind of random in your journey, also in my journey too. It was a spontaneous insight. It actually started around Thailand, and it got deeper and deeper and deeper and it's still getting deeper right now into my practice. It almost makes it impossible for me to get triggered by people or stifled by environments in general, because I see the impersonal nature of it all. It's all completely impersonal. Other person's judgment is completely impersonal and constructed. Am I saying that I'm the Buddha and I no longer get triggered? No, let me make that very clear. It just means that most of the time, obviously I still have triggers and I still have insecurities and shadows that come up, and I can deal with those. Or sometimes I don't deal with those, and I just have to say, I'm just feeling a little bit insecure right now. Okay, remember that principle of anti-fragility. And sometimes I can't even do that, and that's okay too. Okay, just to make sure that I'm not making myself into something which I'm not. Okay, but it's almost like the analogy of, or the metaphor of, if a mama bear who's protecting her cub attacks you, are you going to take that personal? It probably is not on the top of your list of things you want to happen. But in terms of taking it personal, like this mama bear is attacking me because she doesn't like me, doesn't make sense. This is what it means by identifying with the witness, okay? You see how the constructed nature of things, of how people's views and projections and shadows and assumptions and judgments of you, I mean this in the best possible way, are completely meaningless. My own are like that too. But also at the same time holding the polarity that because they come from aliveness and consciousness, and it's super deep, and we all share that same, whatever you want to call it. If you're more religious, maybe same sense of God. If you're like a Christian, Christhood, or we're all coming from God, all that kind of stuff. In Buddhism, we're seeing the Buddha nature. Because we all come from that, it's still inherently meaningful. Because this moment and consciousness and aliveness in and of itself is meaningful, whilst being totally meaningless, okay? And like I said, some storylines, they have a bit of extra juice to them. They have a bit of extra pull to them because we've deluded ourselves into thinking they're more real. I'm sure you can think of a ton of examples. I know I can think of a ton of examples for myself. Sometimes they are more real, oftentimes they're not, okay? And if we can see how our consciousness gets pulled by different things and how it's constructed and how that pull is constructed, how that craving is constructed, then we get affected less by this. If you do this before you're ready, it could just lead to disassociating. So thanks for sticking along in the video. As you can tell, my camera ran out of storage, but it was a good time to stop there anyway because it was kind of getting very abstract, very advanced. I'll just stay with the conclusions for you. Go and use this video in order. You want to make sure that every single practice is ingrained before you move on to the next. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not trying to be perfectionistic here, but about 80%, 70, 80% there so that you can actually start up a new practice. Then sign up your email. Like I said, it only costs your email to get that insecurity masterclass, which I have online, totally free. And remember, the best people that I've seen overcoming this, the best students I've ever had, when I've worked with mentors, the best results that I've ever got is someone who's super active and super agentive about their learning, asking questions. My email is in my bio. I'll also be emailing you too. I don't spam, anything like that. And we can go back and forth. I'm happy to go back and forth if you've gone through this masterclass fully in order to give you a bit of extra support, because it's a long masterclass. I want to reward people who stayed along till the end. So I'll see you on the next one.